Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us this afternoon. If you're watching us and joining us in Europe, obviously elsewhere it'll be different times, but with me this afternoon is Mara and Jude, who are both two of our wonderful volunteer coaches who've been supporting our Young Leadership Programme. And what we thought we'd do this afternoon is have a chat with a slightly different twist to it. So not spend too much time on the challenges that young leaders face, but perhaps spend a bit of time about what the coaches get out of working with young people and coaching them and supporting them in their development. Mara is looking after two of our young leaders at the moment. We've lost. Oh, we're back again. There's a connection problem with the thunderstorms, probably in the UK. So just as I was saying, Mara is looking after Layla, who's a young woman who lives and works in Somalia. And she's also coaching Mehdi, who's recently joined us, who's based in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and works for an organization called the Congo Tree. And Jude is looking after Florence in Namibia, a wonderful woman who works in the field of sort of feminine equality and has got a small team of people who work with her doing that work in Namibia. So it's great to see you both. Thanks for joining us. As usual, if anyone is watching or wants to post a question or wants to challenge anything that you hear us talking about, just do so and we'll do our best to include you in the conversation. So, Mara, first of all, you're working with two of our young leaders. You've also offered to work with a third one in South America when that comes on stream in a few weeks' time. So what's been your impressions, first of all, of working with young people in different parts of the world?
Well, working with young people is already energizing because they have a completely different view on certain aspects of life, of work than we do. And working with the young leaders in those areas of the world with the challenges they face, and I won't go into those, but it's kind of a wake-up call for us in our comfortable environment to appreciate those aspects of life that we sometimes dismiss because it's taken for granted. And I admire really the dedication they have to the work and the mission of the work. With the young woman I coach, and actually the coaching process lasted less than expected because her development was so fast that we decided to interrupt it for the time being. And she has developed a self-confidence that is now traveling and meeting ministry people. And you just see them, what is the word in English? Flourish,
yes.
Thrive, and it's a huge satisfaction. With the other person I'm coaching, he is living in a completely different environment, and he has his dedication to working with youth and building a new future. And we complain here in Europe about so many trivial things that when you realize what they're going through, you want to help if you can, to help them feel valued as well. So
yeah, and
for me, it's very rewarding.
It is amazing, in my experience, what the people that we're supporting are able to do with so little.
You
know, whether it's funding or whether it's support or whether it's knowledge or information or lack of security, they just seem to be able to do an enormous amount with very little.
Yes, I fully agree. And it energizes you when you work with these people because you realize that there's a lot you can do and you haven't, but you can now. So that's good.
Jude, what's been your experience with our colleague in Namibia?
Well, I've worked with two people, and one of whom I finished the coaching with, and with my coachee in Namibia. I mean, it's an amazing thing, actually. I'm just thinking about what Mara was saying about a wake-up call. In terms of my experience of working with her, I've had 2 meetings so far. All kinds of things just get highlighted for me. One of them is, I think Mara was just talking about that idea of, almost we need to look at our own way of working because it's a real opportunity to kind of find out what people want in very changing times. So that's been one thing I've taken from it. So really, starting something afresh and kind of questioning my own views about what is good coaching or not. Sometimes, there's a certain cultural impression of what coaching is, or perhaps not a strong sense of it. I'm not sure I would say that in the case of the person I'm working with in Namibia, but maybe a bit of a question mark. What can this do for me? And it really makes me think about, okay, so what can I bring? What's helpful here? What's the best way to present this? It's almost like, here's a menu of things we could do. And that gets me to really think about, what are my resources? What can I bring? How can I sort of meet her in her needs? I find that incredibly energizing. I don't know about you, Mara. I just find it really invigorating. So it's challenging me in that way. And there's a very obvious, certainly in this particular case, I don't want to be sort of cliched about it, but there's a tech issue. Sometimes it's difficult to connect. We mainly connect on the internet. And that, again, it's always worked one way or another. You can take less for granted than you might do in some circumstances. So just thinking about, how do we get the messages across? How do we communicate? And what's effective here? Really kind of a stretch on my creativity. It's been really, I've really enjoyed it, I just want to say. Very different, the two people I've worked with so far, very different needs and contexts, of course, but being able to explore some things in a different kind of depth. And one thing, I just want to, I hope I'm not sort of, making certain assumptions here. It feels, this way of working feels very enabling. We can bring all kinds of ways to it. Yeah. It's not the same as doing a kind of structured coaching process necessarily. We can decide, to a certain point at least, what we do, how much we bring. So again, finding that very exciting.
Yes, I mean, and just remind me, the first person you coached was based where?
She's from Wales, in Brussels now, and there's been a theme about kind of not exactly where is home, but how you carry home with you. So we talked around that, but yeah. From just what one might say, Yeah.
I mean, the way this has all come about has really been just organic. I mean, there's been no real planning to it at all. But the thing that I find interesting, and I think we're now up to if I include one or two of the most recent people that we are supporting now, I think we're up to about 35, or that about that number. And there's 2 more to join us from Mexico and from the Dominican Republic shortly. But although it's been a bit random and a bit sort of, anyone who approaches us, let's have a chat and see if it works. For me, there seem to be some common themes. And one in particular is about women's issues in broad terms, whether that's violence, whether it's things to do with sort of birth control, whether it's to do with attitudes within communities towards women's education. And I'm just struck by how brave some of these young people are, because they're confronting some of these issues absolutely full on in parts of the world where, for whatever the reason, there's normally quite a lot of reluctance, reticence, outright disgust even at some of the things that they might be talking about. They're fighting against all sorts of social norms that we take for granted. I don't know what, and I know in both of your cases there have been sort of issues around that, but I'm just fascinated how they just get on with it, and I think the other thing too is that their willingness to talk to each other. We've connected a few of the young people together, some of the early ones. No, they just love the idea of connecting with someone in a different part of the world, and probably not a little bit like them, other than the fact that they're in some sort of young leadership role.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but that opens possibilities for them and perspective. They feel less isolated, and more. Internet connects everybody, but here what you're offering them is a connection with a purpose, to share some experiences around a common goal, developing their leadership, easing the way in which they live and lead others. So I think to me, it fits the profile I mean, knowing this, well, I only know two of these people, but knowing their enthusiasm, I wouldn't doubt for a second that they would want to connect with others in their position.
I mean, just picking up on that point you were making, Matthew, about, well, you've started talking about women working in specific circumstances with various points of resistance, I suppose. I don't want to make too much of this, but I'm thinking about, of course, the experience we've all had in one way or another, going through the last few years. And my sense of it is that for some people, at least, I mean, I might apply this to one of the two people I've been working with. There's something that might almost be seen as liberating about that, because there's been a lot of division. One could say a lot more about that, but I think sometimes people are finding new ways of working and pushing against some of the rules that have been there for obviously donkey's years, but things have been shaken up, some rules have been broken, and so let's see where this takes us. I think I'm noticing, I don't know what you think, Mara, more risk-taking perhaps where it matters, in accordance with values, and it's really interesting. I mean, it's let's see what happens, but yes, more kind of pushback. Let's see what we can challenge now is a theme I'm picking up, maybe with a bit of courage showing there. Yeah.
And there is this thing, there are things that they cannot change, so they need to find ways to live with it and through it and thrive at the same time. So they find strategies, and but they need to develop that confidence in themselves that give themselves permission to stand up and say no sometimes. And it happens, it does happen, and it is well accepted in the end. At least that was my experience in my coaching.
And one of the very first young people we supported, her name is Asta Singh, and she works for the Nandi Foundation in India, and Jane Miller has been coaching her. We've now got a clip on our website of Asta talking about what she felt she needed to do differently to be able to take her rightful place within the very large community that's the Nandi Foundation. And picking up on your point about confidence, she had to conduct, or does have to conduct, a lot of her work in English at an organizational level, even though coming from Northern India, her English, by her own sort of admission, was pretty poor. And Jane was able to sort of work with her just to build her confidence, and has done so over a period, I think, probably a lot longer than 12 months. The difference is remarkable, and it's not just Asta saying it's remarkable. It's the people who work around her who are saying this is well, it seems a strange thing to say, but this is almost like a completely different young woman. The confidence, the ability to stand up and say things in front of a group of people, to put forward ideas, to the point now that she's got a role within the learning and development team, which they newly formed. And it's that sort of, I think it is this confidence piece at the heart of it. They've got, they're brave. They've got the bravery bit. It's just helping support them in a sort of taking the approach where they move that bravery into something that's not just perhaps in my thought, sort of a sort of frustration, but something positive that they can then do with it.
Yeah, and they move into action. I think the moment they feel they have not only the right, but the competences, the ability, and the support to do it, they take risks and they learn, sometimes quicker than the managers were used to in our rich companies. They are able and willing to take much more risks, in my experience.
Yeah. And I think there's also an opportunity to look at what do they bring. I mean, I've noticed in some of the conversations I've had, some people can find that a very difficult question to answer. What are your strengths? It sounds like that classic coaching question, but you know what? I mean, it's really quite difficult for a lot of people. And I'm just thinking about that point about confidence, being able to have time to explore that in a kind of safe place at the very minimum, seems really enabling. If someone else believes in you and thinks you can do X, Y, Z, it just helps so much, doesn't it? That's been a really good reminder for me from this, just on that level.
And I think coaching is about that, about helping the coachee own their own strengths and his or her identity, so that they can put that to service to whatever they want to do. and that's what we do with them, or they do also with us. So it's great.
Yeah.
Good experience.
We've had a few failures. We're not perfect either in terms of the recruitment process or the coaching process. But the other thing that I keep forgetting is that these are people who've never met any of us. If you're in the worlds that we inhabit, you meet a client, you have some conversations with them, you go to a few meetings, and you perhaps run a little workshop or something, and then you get into coaching, and you've built that connection. These people are all over the world, in some of the poorest, most difficult places to live in. I'm thinking of Afghanistan, where Najib is, and Somalia, and Georgia, where Esme is, and they quite willingly say, yes, I'm happy to share my innermost thoughts with someone I've never met, who's probably got no experience at all of what it's like to live in the country that I live in. That in itself I find quite remarkable, that they just say, yes, come on, I'm up for it. One or two then, I think, quite rightly feel, actually, this is not for me, or I wasn't sure what it was that I was getting into, and I don't understand the idea of coaching. But I think there's only been a couple of people where that's happened, and the rest, have hopefully, judging by the comments they send me, have had some real benefit from it. But Jude, I wanted to go back. That comment you made about it sort of encourages you to think totally differently, or to challenge the way that you would normally approach it. Say a little bit more about that.
Oh dear, I hoped you weren't going to come back to that. Now I'll have to think what I mean. I think, well, part of that is, I think you just kind of touched on it, Matthew. Part of it is, what is coaching? So you're just talking about, the failures where perhaps people think, oh, actually, it's not what I thought. One way in which I've had to challenge myself is, I suppose I go to a lot of coaching meetings thinking there's some sort of understanding about what this will be like, even if this person hasn't had coaching before. That obviously depends where I'm working, but just going back to, what could this be like for this person? What isn't it? And just really clarifying the context again, or exploring it at least, is perhaps a better way to put it. And I mean, one thing I notice is that sometimes if one doesn't do that, then there's a sort of expectation of expertise. For example, this person as a coach is going to tell me what to do. I mean, that's a bit of a classic one, isn't it? But yeah, what do I do here? And are you going to train me in some way? So just, that's a key thing. How do you start? How do you introduce it? How do you kind of build trust and help the person feel there's as much about what you want? In fact, it's entirely about what you want to explore, and I'm here just as a resource for that. That's a very different relationship from what some people might expect. And I've just really noticed again how important it is to kind of make that available, to sort of put it out there. And I think I mentioned something about creativity. I find that, sometimes, I don't know about you, Mara, but I find on Zoom, for example, I take a lot of notes, and there are times I'm thinking, why, perhaps I don't need to do that now, or we might draw something here, or it really does depend. But using the tools in the way that best suits the person, it's another kind of wake-up call for me on that, because you can get quite stuck in your ways. Well, I say you, I mean me. One can kind of work in a certain way, because we do a lot, and it's easy to kind of go to a routine. This challenges that, because it can be, it can be so open and explorative. But I think particularly in this way of working with young people who may have no experience of coaching, with a lot of ambition and wishes and hopes, it's so exciting to do that. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
yeah. I mean, the one of the other challenges I've noticed, for me, as opposed to the young person that I'm trying to connect to, because the process is very much, I make contact with an organization, often with an organization. I have a chat with them and say, look, have you got any young people that you think would benefit from this? Here are the criteria. And then a name pops up, and then you have a Zoom conversation with them and find out how they are and what they're doing. One of the challenges for me is the whole idea about time. So, I'm sitting in my ivory tower in the middle of the United Kingdom with my, sophisticated technology, says he, all around me. And suddenly I find I'm trying to connect with someone who's 6 hours into the bush with no internet connection, but with a mobile phone that's got intermittent connection. And I'm sitting there thinking, hold on, I booked a meeting with these people for 10 o'clock. Where are they? What are they doing? And that for me has been a big learning. And as soon as you respond by acknowledging the difficulties they have, someone had a colleague who unfortunately died. They had to go to a funeral. It was a long way from where they lived, and they missed the call. And they came back and they were hugely apologetic. And I sort of thought, no, this is not the time to sort of say, we need a commitment. They made a commitment. They made a commitment to their friend's funeral. So let's just have a chat about what would work best for them. And in one instance, someone said, WhatsApp is so much better for me than using Zoom or any of the other, Skype or whatever. Someone else said, well, FaceTime actually works for me. And suddenly you start to think, what's key here is helping to communicate through a method that they find easiest to use in their circumstances. And that for me has been really, one, acknowledging the difficulties they face, really important, and two, sort of just trying to be where they are rather than have them meet me where I am. Has been a huge learning for me, huge learning.
And it's putting them at the center, again, not only in the coaching process, but in the relationship. We need to be mindful of their logistics, of their overall social situation, the culture, and we have to rewire ourselves. Yeah. I always say I am a multicultural example because I lived and I was born in another continent. I lived in many countries, and still I have to remind myself, this guy who's living in Congo has war at 50 kilometers away from where he's living. Yeah. He had no electricity today. He was talking on the phone with me.
I mean, you take dear Najib in Afghanistan. He works for Save the Children, and he's their educational coordinator. He's got 5 daughters. He's got no funds. He's got 5 daughters, none of whom are at school. He's a young man in his late 30s, I think, trying desperately hard to provide education through the Save the Children program. And you're thinking, I don't know the half of this.
Yeah.
And yet Mary, who's working with him, has said, it's remarkable. He's keen, he's enthusiastic, he wants to develop, and yet he's living in a world immediately around him that the likes of which none of us are ever going to experience.
Yeah, there's something just perhaps I would add to this. I mean, different kind of issue, but I was thinking, in terms of not only what are the risks for people and what's their working environment, and we, perhaps can't even imagine that. But I just noticed in terms of kind of how we communicate and some of the challenges with the tech and so on. I mean, for instance, the other day when I had a conversation with the person I'm working with in Namibia, I mean, we ended up with, I think we were on WhatsApp and she went for a walk and while I sort of sat in front of my computer as usual. I mean, that's because that's what worked at that time. And it was just a different kind of conversation because I was thinking that, that question about how do we do our best thinking really applies here. And maybe I was aware that, when we're talking together and she's in her sort of office room, there's a bit of disturbance, different level from being in a war zone, but people coming in and out. And when she was out walking, a very different kind of conversation emerged. And sometimes, we can work in this way. It can really make space for people to think. And I'm always fascinated by how that can be different. And sometimes I would say better than when we're sitting facing each other, which of course, in this way of working, we can't. We're spread so much geographically. It really can be interesting how that can evolve. I feel it's a very kind of, I'm going to say human approach. That sounds a bit strange, but this way of working can kind of break through some of the differences and in our working context, because we can find ways of reaching each other. We don't have to sit in a posh office and travel and all of that. That's another matter maybe, but it can find connection points, I think, between people.
Yeah, definitely.
And Mara, you've been really keen to sort of support, well, as Jude has, to support as many young people as possible. So what are you personally getting out of it?
Humility, I mean, sometimes you have to become humble and realize that you're so lucky in life, and that I am looking at opportunities in a different way now. I'm not looking at obstacles in the same way, I think, because I remind myself of what these people do with so little. And I said, why not take opportunities in that way? Yeah, it's giving me humility and appreciation.
Yeah. I mean, I think I've forgotten which one it was you mentioned earlier, but I put a piece on LinkedIn a few weeks ago because I'd had one of my ranting and raving sessions at the local gas station, filling up the car, where it was nearly two pounds a litre, and I then got a link connected to Save the Children in Afghanistan, where basically what I put in my car and I was ranting and raving about, but could afford, was enough to feed and clothe and keep warm a family in Afghanistan for several weeks. And I'm thinking, here am I. I mean, this is again why I enjoy doing this work. Here am I sort of bemoaning the fact that my blasted car, is going to cost me money to fill up because I need to go to the shops and stuff. And there are people that we're working with as coaches who have none of that. Can't even imagine what it would be like to be able to sit in a car, let alone, fill one up with fuel, who've got no homes because of the earthquake or have to walk miles for their education for their children. And you think it does just make you think that there's more important things to life than worrying about whether there's a particular brand of olive oil on the shelves or not.
Exactly.
But it hits you. Yeah, I mean, I find it hits me, not when I'm talking to the young leaders, but when I'm actually in a supermarket or somewhere being confronted by what I think is an impossible question about which brand to choose. And it's suddenly a clang, hold on a moment, this is just nonsense, absolute nonsense.
Yeah.
Anything else you've noticed? Any other thoughts about young leaders?
Well, I was amazed to see that they have such strong values and they live by these values. They are loyal to the values. They can review some principles to be open to new learning, but they are really whole. They're grounded. And they're very young because I mean, they have a maturity for that age that is, I don't know if we find it here so easily.
Yeah.
So that is one thing that struck me a lot. I don't know, Judy, if you had the same experience.
Yes, I have, and I was also thinking about. I mean, I've done coaching sessions in my time, not in this way of working particularly, but when people said, "Oh yes, no, I've tried that before," when you actually don't even know that you've made a suggestion, but I've tried that, it didn't work. There's none of that. It's all about possibility and consideration. And, it feels like so much is possible. Just thinking about what you were just saying, Matthew, about, constrained circumstances of all kinds. That focus on what is possible, and it's a bit of a cliche, but dreaming big. I've really noticed that, and it's humbling. It is. It really is. It's just, let's open things up and see what can be done now. And resilience, I notice an extraordinary amount of that.
Yeah.
Well, obviously there's confidentiality pieces, but we have a young leader, Luciana, who is based in Brazil, and she's taken it on herself to try and improve the political process in Brazil, to try and bring a sort of ethics, morality, a whole range of different things into the way local legislators and the national government operate. And I'm thinking, that is truly impactful. And she's just got on and done it because she feels that's important. Esme in Georgia, she's blind. She can't see, and yet she's the United Nations youth representative for Georgia, travels all over the country with a colleague driving her, visiting sort of local villages, talking to youth leaders. And you think, I don't know that I can think of anyone in my sphere at sort of 25, 30 years of age doing that. There must be. I mean, don't get me wrong, but not in the circles that I currently move about in. And you just think, I wonder what it was that drove them to do all of this. You know, did they just wait? I don't think they would have woken up one morning and said, I must do something different. You know, my life is ending. I must go off and do something great. They just had it in them that they wanted to make change happen, and have just gone ahead and done it. And it seems, and when I thought, you know, with some of the ones we've met earlier on, I thought, gosh, this is impactful. It's just carried on being impactful. I don't think there's been, out of that 36 or 38 or whatever, there's not a single young person that we've been in touch with that isn't absolutely driven to make their local world a better place.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
that's fabulous.
Yeah.
A real sense of focus. Yeah. Knowing what they want and going for it. That's what I've noticed.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, Mara. I've really noticed that. It's not been difficult to find what are the goals here. What do you hope for?
Mm-hmm.
So
they know.
Having had this experience, this is a bit mean of me, that the thought of going back to coaching a middle-aged senior executive in a global organization fills you with dread, or do you think stuff this? I've done it with young people in different parts of the world. I can take on this middle-aged, boring global leader, and you know, I can help them develop as well.
Come on, we didn't say more boring, but I think that we can also bring that experience and kind of recenter ourselves in our coaching with them, bringing things to the essentials as well when it needs to be done. If it enriches us, it can also show in our work with others. They also need help. Come on.
Yeah. Oh yes, I know. It's just, you know, going back to Jude's point, you know, I mean, I don't coach, but often I facilitate a workshop and someone sits there saying, this is rubbish, I'm not going to do it. I've tried all of this, it's bunkum and it won't work. And you think, please, just can I leave now and go somewhere else? And then, you know, you meet all these young people who say, come on, bring it on, help me, support me, I've got things I want to do. And it's just different. So I just wonder whether, you know, it might have a negative impact on our attitude to some of the people who are a bit the naysayers.
I mean, everyone was young once, weren't they? And I'm middle-aged myself now. But yeah, no, I mean, yeah, the boring bit, I'm not sure about that. But I think there's always that potential to find the starting point, isn't there? Whatever the person's age, you know, and there's always a potential to go back to something a bit more basic, or some questions they might have asked themselves in the past. And, you know, I think it really is about finding out what lights the spark, I suppose. You can find that at any age, can't you, really?
Yeah. So is there anything that you've done with the young leaders that you've suddenly thought, hold on a moment, this could be an approach I could adopt with people who are, if you like, more of the group that we spend a lot of time working with?
Yeah, I mean,
in a way, yeah.
Sorry. Naive questions. I mean, in quotes, naive. You know, sometimes asking a question that seems so obvious that we don't ask it, but actually has a lot of power. That's something, because I tend to find I use those more freely with younger people because they haven't been asked necessarily as many times before. So going back to that, and also something like appreciative inquiry, which I don't know, people will be familiar with, but is really focusing on the positive, not to the extent of ignoring the negative, but finding solutions by focusing on what works here, what is good, because it gives energy. And sometimes, you know, your middle-aged senior executive, going back to that person, can think, oh, for goodness sake, we've got to get to grips with these problems. Look at all we've got in front of us. But actually, that approach can work really well, because sometimes you just need to lift your head above water and see what's already good here. That's something I find, can take ahead.
Yeah, and for me, it is kind of also linking to appreciative inquiry, where I start making them visualize what is it that they want to achieve. I mean, okay, you don't like what you have now. What is it that you want instead? And now we can work on constructing and constructive options, which is what works with these young people, because problems for them, they will disappear because they will make them disappear. And that level of commitment It's just amazing.
Yeah. So anything else? I'm conscious of time, but anything else that sort of comes to mind in the work that you've been kindly doing for Let's Talk Leadership?
I was just going to say, another thing that I really love is the hunger that's there, the kind of hunger for ideas, for input, for checking out things with you as a sort of sounding board. All of that, it's really got so much energy behind it. I mean, the people I've worked with have really wanted it and really wanted to get something from it. And that's great, isn't it? Because if you're working with, I don't really know what the boss told me to come. There's nothing worse than that. I mean, that's happened too often, but who wants that? So that's really there. I really noticed it. Yeah.
No, for me, is I need to do this to put my profession, my activity in perspective, and keep on learning about cultures, about different realities, about how I deal with that diversity, and be a better coach and a better person, I hope. So keep on sending them, Matthew.
Well, yes, I mean, we can only do it because of people like you who are prepared to volunteer your time and expertise. I mean, it is wonderful because when we originally started this, I think I reached out to a few of the people I knew, and the response was almost totally, yes, we want to be involved. And we've now got, I know I was talking about sort of 35, 36 young people, but we've got about 30 coaches on the scheme now. And there's always one or two extra people. You know, someone says, well, I know of someone who might be of interest, and you contact them and said, yes, I'd love to be involved. So being able to bring young people from around the world with experienced people like you, and the fact that you can deliver your coaching in a number of different languages, which is hugely important, is just a joy. I mean, I think it's, for me, it's one of the most interesting and motivational things that I've been involved with. And I'm glad at the start of the pandemic that I sort of voiced an idea which has, with a lot of support from other people, has come to this, which is great. And we are going to continue because it's easy just connecting people together like we're doing, and as we've been talking this afternoon. So thanks for your help. I must ask you, Mara, are you coaching Mehdi in French or in English? Did he go back to French?
I am coaching today in English with the Somali girl, and in French with the Congolese guy.
Great, yeah. And again, it's meeting them where they're at, because when he approached me, he spoke English, and with a little bit of questioning, he then admitted that he would prefer it, if it was possible, to speak in French, but he would speak in English if he had to. And I thought, again, you know, total commitment on his part. He was going to make it happen in any way he could. Yeah. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for sharing your ideas and thoughts and interests this afternoon. It's been great fun. We're going to finish now, but if anyone's been listening or they've got comments to make, do get in touch. And if you're a potential person for coaching or a young leader who might like some coaching, then this is how you get hold of us. Just approach letstalkleadership.org and send us an email. Great. Lovely to see you both. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you.
Bye.